occupational illnesses are not as easily identified as are injuries. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there were 4.0 million injuries and illnesses reported in 2004. Of this number, only 249,000 cases of occupational illnesses were reported. The 249,000 occupational illnesses included repeat trauma, such as carpal tunnel syndrome, noise-induced hearing loss, and poisonings. It is my professional opinion that many occupational illnesses go unreported when the employer or worker is not able to link exposure with the symptoms of the employee's exhibit. In addition, physicians fail to ask the right questions regarding the patient's employment history, which can lead to the commonest diagnosis of a cold or flu. This has become very apparent with the recent occupational exposure to anthrax, where a physician sent a worker home with anthrax without addressing the potential occupational exposure hazards. Unless the physician is trained in occupational medicine, he or she seldom addresses work as the potential exposure source. This is not entirely a physician problem by any means, since the symptoms that are seen by the physician are often those of flu and other common illnesses suffered by the public. So let's talk about the first hazard, which is chemical hazard. This hazard is arise from excessive airborne concentrations like mga vapors, gases, or solid na mahimong abog or fumes. In addition to the hazards of inhalations, dagang mga materials may act as skin irritants or may be toxic by absorption sa atong panit. Chemicals can also be ingested, although this is not usually the principal route of entry sa atong lawas. Also, chemical hazard is makakause sad siya og mga long-term illnesses like mga cancer or makadamage sa atong vital organs if exposure is mataas. The second hazard is physical hazard, which is referred to environmental factors that can cause injury o mga sakit. This include ionizing and non-ionizing radiation, such as UV lights and X-rays, na makadamage and increase sa cancer. And also, noise exposure is lain sa na siyang physical hazard that can lead to hearing loss or other auditory problems when it's a high level over long periods. Vibration is another physical hazard that can lead injuries like carpal tunnel syndromes or other repetitive stress injuries. Temperature extremes, heat or cold, is such as heat stroke or frostbite, while fluctuating or high pressure environments can lead to accidental problems, such as decompression sickness. Next is ergonomic hazards, which is involved the design of workspaces and tools that do not suit the natural movements or positions of workers. Poorly designed tools or work areas can force workers into awkward, uncomfortable, or repetitive positions that lead to strain, muscle, fatigue, or injuries like sprains, strains, or repetitive stress injuries. Improper lifting, reaching, or bending can also cause musculoskeletal disorders over time. Additionally, poor lighting, inadequate seating, or poorly arranged workspaces can contribute to physical discomfort and accidents. When designing workplace and tools, it is essential to consider human factors, ensuring that tasks are appropriate for the worker's body and needs. The last hazard is biological hazards, which refer to harmful organisms and substances that can cause disease. These hazards include insects like mosquitoes, molds, fungi, viruses, and vermin, such as rats, mice, or birds, which can spread diseases. For instance, mosquitoes transmit like malaria and dengue, while rats can carry disease like leptospirosis. Fungi and molds can cause respiratory issues or allergic reactions. Bacteria are also a major concern, and exposure to bacterial contaminants can lead to infections or other health problems. Workplace environments, especially in food handling, healthcare, and sanitation, can be breeding grounds for these biological hazards. Cold stress occurs when the body loses more heat than it can produce, especially in cold and wet conditions. This leads to a drop in body temperature, with the greatest heat loss occurring when in contact with cold water or wet objects. Factors like air temperature, wind speed, and physical activity influence heat loss, and heat can also be lost through sweat, breathing, and contact with cold objects. Heat stress, on the other hand, happens in environments with high temperatures, humidity, or physical exertion. Industries like foundries, bakeries, and construction sites are prone to heat stress. Factors like radiant heat, air movement, and humidity affect the body's ability to cool down. There are no specific OSHA regulations for heat stress, but the ACGIH recommends that workers' body temperature should not exceed in 38 degrees Celsius to avoid complications. Complications transpire when workers suffer from heat exposure. The main anomalies are heat stroke, heat exhaustion, heat cramps, fainting, and heat rush. Let's talk about vibration. Vibrating tools and equipment at frequencies between 40 and 90 Hz is makadamage siya sa circulatory and nervous systems. Care must be taken with low frequencies which have the potential to put workers at risk for vibration injuries. One of the most common cumulative trauma disorders resulting from vibration is Raynaud's syndrome. Its most common symptoms are intermittent numbness and tingling in the fingers, skin that turns pale, ashen and cold, and eventual loss of sensation and control in the fingers and hands. Raynaud's syndrome comes about by the use of vibrating hand tools such as palm sanders, planners, jackhammers, grinders, and buffers. Now let's talk about health hazards. So unsa dining health hazard? Health hazards are caused by any chemical or biological exposure that interacts adversely with organs within our body, causing illnesses or injuries. The majority of chemical exposures result from inhaling chemical contaminants in the form of vapors, gases, dust, fumes, and mist, or by skin absorption of these materials. The degree of the hazard depends on the length of exposure time and the amount of quantity of the chemical agent. This is considered to be dose of substance. Thus, a chemical is considered a poison when it causes harmful effects or interferes with biological reactions in the body. Only those chemicals that are associated with a great risk of harmful effects are designated as poisons. When such tools are required for a job, an assessment should be made to determine if any other methods can be used to accomplish the desired task. If not, other techniques such as time, use limitations, alternating workers, or other such administrative actions should be considered to help reduce the potential for a vibration-induced setting. The damage caused by vibrating tools can be reduced by using vibration dampening gloves, purchasing low vibration tools and equipment, putting anti-vibration material on handles of existing tools, reducing length of exposure, changing the actual work procedures if possible, using balance and dampening tools and equipment, rotating workers to decrease exposure time.
One of the hazardous chemicals that can cause cancer is carcinogens. Carcinogens in the workplace pose significant risk. OSHA has identified several chemicals as carcinogens, including benzene and formaldehyde. Employers should aim for zero exposure to these substances to prevent cancer. Next is biological monitoring. Biological monitoring is the analysis of body systems such as blood, urine, fingernails, teeth, etc., which is provide a baseline level of contaminants in the body. Medical testing can have several different purposes, depending on why the worker is visiting a doctor. Example of biological monitoring are medical questionnaire, pulmonary function test, electrocardiogram, and chest X-ray. Next is hazard communication standard. The hazard communication standard ensures workers know about work hazards and protective measures. It requires employers to maintain a list of hazardous chemicals, obtain MSDS for each chemical, label containers, and train employees. Compliance helps reduce chemical-related illnesses and injuries.
Becoming familiar with the rule. OSHA has provided a simple summary of the HCS in a pamphlet entitled Chemical Hazard Communications, OSHA publication number 3084. Some employers prefer to begin to familiarize themselves with the rules requirements by reading the pamphlet. A copy may be contained from your local OSHA area office or via the OSHA website under Publications or search by title. The standard is long and some parts of it are technical, but the basic concepts are simple. In fact, the requirements reflect many employers have been doing for years. You may find that you have already largely in compliance with the operating of the OSHA-approved state plan. You must comply with the state requirements, which may be different from those in the federal rule. Identifying responsible staff. Hazard communication will be the continuing program in the facility. Compliance with the HCS is not a one-shot deal. To have a successful program, it will be necessary to assign responsible for both the initial and ongoing activities that have been undertaken to comply with the rule. In some cases, these activities may already be part of the current job assignments. For example, site supervisions are frequently responsible for on-the-job training sessions. Early identification of the responsibilities employees and involved of them in the development of your plan of action will result in a more effective program design. Containers of hazardous chemicals must be labeled, tagged, or marked with an identity of the material and appropriate hazard warning. Chemical manufacturers, importers, and distributors are required to ensure that every container of hazardous materials they ship is appropriately labeled with such information and with the name and address of the producer's other responsibility party. Employers purchasing chemicals can rely on the labels provided by their suppliers. If the material is subsequently transferred by an employer from the labeled container to another, the employer will have to label the container unless it is subject to the portable container exemption. The primary information to be obtained from the OSHA required label is identity for the material and appropriate hazard warning. This identity is a term that appears on the label, the MSDS, and the list of chemicals, and thus links these three sources of information. There are no specific requirements for the size, color, or any specific text with the requirement in mind. The compliance officer will be looking for the following types of information to ensure the label is properly implemented in your facility. Number 1. Designation of personal responsibility for ensuring labeled in the plant containers. Number 2. Designation of persons responsible for ensuring labeling of any shipped containers. Number 3. Description of labeling system used. Number 4. Description of written alternatives for labeling in a plant container sheets. Chemical manufacturers and importers are required to obtain or develop an MSDS for each hazardous chemical they produce or import. Distributors are responsible for ensuring that their customers are provided a copy of this MSDS. Employers must have an MSDS for each hazardous chemical that they use. Employers may rely on the information received from each supplier. These specific requirements for MSDS are presented in the paragraph of the standards. There is no specific format for MSDS under the rule, though there are specific information required. OSHA or OSHA has developed a non-mandatory format, OSHA Form 174, which may be used by chemical manufacturers and imports to comply with the rule. To ensure that you have a current MSDS for each chemical in a plant as required, that employer access is provided. The compliance officer will be looking for the following types of information in your written programs. Number 1. Designation for persons responsible for maintaining the MSDS. Number 2. How much the sheets are to be maintained in the workplace. Number 3, procedures to follow with the MSDS is not received at the time of the first shipment. Number 4, for producers to update the MSDS when new and significant health information is found. Number 5, description of alternative to actual data sheets in the workplace.